All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. It is 10 a.m. Pacific, March 19th, and my name is Carrie Jorgenson. I'm a senior college coach here at ESM Prep. We talk in admission cycles. I've been here for 4 admission cycles, and prior to that, I served two seasons reading admission files for UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley, and also spent about 10 years working in schools as a guidance and college counselor. Excited to be here and share a little bit more about college decisions and what is next.
And my name's Stuart Easton. I've been with ESM for actually 5 admission cycles. And previous to that, I came a different route, came through the classroom, came through teaching and through college essays into admissions. I'm also really excited to be here and know this can be a confusing or stressful time, which sometimes catches people off guard because you think the hard part is the application. But we're going to hopefully ease any worries, make it super clear, and give you a path forward. I'm really excited to do that.
Excellent. All right, moment of truth, technical challenge here. And we are in slideshow mode. Excellent.
Right.
Okay, here we go.
Done.
Success. All right, so today we're going to cover about 5 different topics, ranging from admission trends for the class of 2029, helping current senior students think about the best way to ultimately make that match and decide the bumper sticker that they want on their car, the college name they want on their sweatshirt. We'll go through wait lists and everything that you need to know in the event that you were waitlisted at a school that remains a top choice. We'll talk about what needs to happen before May 1st, that national decision deadline for all seniors in the United States and abroad, and the spring senior to-do list. So that last stretch, the last to-do list related to college counseling and college admissions for seniors.
And as we go here, just a note, we do have the raise your hand function, the Q&A, the chat, a bunch of different ways you can reach out if you have a question as we're talking on something.
Excellent. All right. So we figured that kind of setting the stage for the class of 2029, those current seniors, is always useful to understand context. So some trends that we've seen in admissions, specifically for the class of 2029, include regional changes in popularity. So really what that means is that overall, applications grew 8%, which is significant. More and more kids are applying to college. And we also saw certain regions jump a lot higher than others. Specifically, the Southwest is having its moment, and it saw an extraordinary jump of 29%. We think that that's fueled by rapid population growth. As many of you may recall, during COVID, a lot of people left our state of California and headed elsewhere, headed to Texas, headed to Florida, followed big business. There's, lots of migration patterns happening all over the United States. And as a result, we're seeing regional changes for popularity for some of the colleges in certain regions. So yeah, 29% increase. And Texas led that charge with a 32% jump in applications. And then Florida's expanding university system also saw some notable gains. So just something to keep in mind if maybe an admission outcome at a school based in the Southwest specifically wasn't in your favor, it could be due to that regional change and increase in popularity. Another kind of focus for the class of 2029 and beyond, and this is just an important concept to understand in general related to college counseling, is that having a strong narrative and a brand as an applicant is more important than ever. So providing evidence to colleges that you do in fact want to major in biology, for instance, as evidenced by maybe engaging in a little bit of a research program during a summer, or getting an internship shadowing a biotech firm, or, the sky's the limit in terms of how you can really formulate a narrative. But showing that evidence to colleges that you're ready for especially a competitive major or a program is more important now than ever. This isn't the case for all majors. I'd say in general, it's a good idea to be thoughtful about your narrative and how you're presenting yourself. But the majors where it really matters are engineering, business, computer science, architecture, biology, and nursing. So if you're an applicant, you applied into one of those programs, having that compelling narrative to back up why you want to be accepted into that major is really important. Connecting those dots for the admission officer. It's the narrative, obviously, in conjunction with strong test scores, grades, AP, IB exam scores as well. So, you can't unfortunately have one without the other, since colleges do engage in that holistic review. But for anybody listening who might have, younger siblings, if you miss the mark on creating a compelling narrative, like, it is a really important piece of this admission puzzle. And then the last note that I'll make is that, just volume in general. We've known for the last 15, 20 years that early is better for applicants. So applying during those early rounds, which include early action, the non-binding plan, and early decision, the binding plan, that is beneficial for an applicant. The benefit of applying early is that you actually get a chance for your application to be looked at twice in the event that you are what we call deferred. So say you apply early action, those applications are due around early November typically. A college looks at your file, they say, you know what, we really like this student. They have the narrative, they have the grades, but we know that this is going to be a pretty selective pool. So let's pause and see how that student does. And we will defer the student and then reread the file again in January and February. And so it allows for that second review versus if you just apply in the regular round, it's one review and you're either rejected, accepted, or waitlisted. And so overall, we have seen a pretty significant increase in applications overall with 8%, especially an increase in the EA and ED rounds at selective colleges.
And just to piggyback off of that, one of the trickle-down effects of those EA deferrals is that means it's so important to follow up with letter of continued interest. It also gives you another card to play some schools to convert to an early decision too, and kind of make a double early application, a double commitment, a double down to the university. So having an early strategy and then executing on any deferrals and continued interest and things like that become even more important when it's so competitive and so popular. Speaking of which, there was a huge growth in test score submissions, which is probably somewhat predictable, but is borne out in the numbers. This is, as we get further and further away from COVID, further and further away from the origins of test optional, testing is becoming more and more important or returning back to its importance. So this year, there was a 9% rise among students reporting test scores. There was also a 4% growth amongst those not submitting because there's just growth everywhere in applications. But you can see more than 2-to-1 students growing in submitting their scores. That also means, the average test scores at these universities that rocketed up during the test optional when only great scores were getting submitted will start to balance out a little bit as the data comes in. But having a test score, if it's a possibility, is returning to prevalence. On that note, a lot more schools are shedding their test optional flexibility. Currently, University of Texas, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Brown, Georgetown, Caltech, Purdue require, but in the next cycle, we already know some schools that you might consider on a different tier, a different level than those schools, like University of Miami, returning to requiring test scores. It's the trend. The trend is likely to continue in that direction. So again, your results might be influenced by that. And if there's anybody in your life who's applying for college down the line, that's a good note. Other things more anecdotal about this class, it's the first ChatGPT class, first group of students writing essays with access to that. We'll kind of hear stories about that, but from what we know, colleges are taking it seriously and are on the lookout for AI influence, and how they learn to do that and how they react to that will become more sophisticated as well. We labeled this as the first non-COVID class, generally just meaning that the freshmen weren't, uh, you know, overly impacted by that experience. Of course, they were in middle school, but it's becoming less and less of a topic for essays, less and less of an impact on how colleges view grades and things like that. And it's the first digital SAT class, if that was a factor for anybody. For some, that was a relief. For some, that was a difficulty. And we'll continue to see the testing evolve. The ACT is working on that as well. And the final note here is, in all these trends are without the final data from a lot of schools that come out at the end of March, specifically the Ivy League. So that'll impact all this context. But that's the general direction everything went this year. So hopefully some of your results you can understand a little bit better with those trends. And now we'll dive a little bit more into the specifics of your results.
Excellent. Sure, it keeps our job interesting. Every admission cycle, it seems like we could have a completely different set of bullet points next year.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
staying on top of the latest is important in our world.
Mhm.
All right, and next up, making your match. So by now, most students have heard back from, I would argue, 80% of their colleges that they applied to. Maybe you're waiting for a few, especially like Stuart just mentioned, Ivy League schools that come out at the end of March. But by now, you have pretty much the entire landscape of your options. It's pretty much no student goes unscathed in this process. I would say everybody ends up with a nice smattering of acceptances, wait lists, unfortunately rejections. That is part of this process. I think for anyone listening right now, I just want to reiterate the point that a rejection is certainly not an indicator as to, you know, your worth. It is unfortunately just a numbers game, and highly qualified, perfect fit applicants get rejected every single day, because the pool is so saturated, because there are, I think I just saw a stat that 1.2 million seniors applied to colleges on the Common App. You know, and then if you look at the top, say, 200 to 250 schools that, you know, the constant name brand schools that students are really excited about, they don't have space for that number of students. So it's unfortunately a numbers game. But I really believe, having done this for many years now, that if you are true to yourself, you're going to make that match and you're going to end up somewhere great because you're there and you've listened to that voice and you've ended up being somewhere that wants you. That's the most important thing. It's a little bit like dating, right? You don't want to get in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to be in a relationship with you. So, you know, lots of different things to consider as you're making your match. Every family, I think, really needs to go back to the drawing board at this point in the process and think about your core family values and your kind of original wish list. What I do with a lot of my students as they're trying to decide between their, you know, 2 to 3 schools that they've gotten into, if it's not crystal clear where they want to go, is we go back to an exercise I have all my students do, you know, as early as sophomore year, related to their wish list. And students kind of think through this matrix of options and decide what's really important to them and what they want out of their college experience. And we go back to that. And I think if a student is true to those criteria, they're going to end up making that great match. So obviously, the other big piece to consider is you're getting closer and closer to having to pay the bill. And so being mindful of financial aid offers that come out. Oftentimes colleges release an admission decision, and then a few weeks later, you'll get a letter in the mail or through your portal that says, okay, great, you've been accepted. We know we told you that you got the presidential scholarship, which is $10,000 a year, but here's how this actually breaks down. Then you can review those financial aid offers and really make an informed decision for yourself, to decide what is the best fit for your family based off of finances. You know, taking on significant amount of debt as a 18, 19-year-old is a long-term decision and something that can impact you for many, many years. I know it took me many years to pay off my grad school loans. And, you know, it's just a consideration. And so thinking long-term about the financial implications for you as a student or for your family is really important. One thing I'll let you know that people don't always realize is that you often can actually negotiate your financial aid package. So every single college has a financial aid office that is stocked with really helpful people who are eager to talk with you on the phone. Colleges are in what's called yield season. So that means that their job right now is to convert as many of the applicants that they admitted into yeses back. That's a hard job. I pulled a stat that I want to make sure that I get correctly for you guys regarding yield. But it was that on average, according to a report from NACAC, which is the National Association for College Admission Counseling, the average yield rate of colleges has dramatically declined over the past decade from 48.7 to 33.6%. So what that means is that when a college sends out a bunch of offers to applicants, on average, only 33% of those applicants say yes back to them. And so the reason I bring all this up in the context of financial aid is that you better believe that a college, they are wanting to make this as accessible to you as possible. And that's where that room for negotiation really is there. And so, you know, now in March and April, this is the time to get on the phone, call these colleges and ask for a better price. Obviously within reason, but if your family's financial situation has changed at all since you've submitted any of the financial aid forms, yes, give the college a call and chat and see if there's anything else they can do, or if there's new and compelling data like, hey, my kid just took the SAT for the last time, and this particular college wasn't able to see that the SAT score improved. But I want to make sure that you're aware of it. Like it's worth letting the school know about that. One last bit on yield is that even Harvard University, their yield has gone down to 83%. So even kids who get an acceptance from Harvard, about 15, 18% are not accepting that offer. And so Harvard has to think about their yield too. So just some interesting insight. And I just want to make a quick note. I see a couple of hands raised. We will answer questions at the end. So thank you for being patient with your questions. And so the other piece about college visits, or excuse me, making your match, is college visits and taking the time to actually really physically step foot onto a campus if that's possible. I know that's, you know, families sometimes have constraints and aren't able to actually physically get to a campus. But if you can't get to a campus, it is absolutely worth reaching out to the admission officer who's assigned to your particular geographic region and saying, look, I'm deciding between you and your school and another school. Can we set up a Zoom and chat with the admission officer, pick their brain, let them know the top 3 things you want out of your college experience, and let them sell you. You can also, of course, attend a virtual visit. Pretty much virtually every college offers like a 30-minute kind of webinar style online visit that you can absolutely engage in as well. But do your homework and try and picture yourself on that college campus. The other piece to this puzzle, I think, with visits especially, is pay attention to that visceral reaction. If you are, you know, physically stepping on campus of 2 or 3 campuses, like that kind of gut feeling that you get is probably telling you that that's that right place for you when you're visiting. The other thing I always like students to be really mindful of as they're deciding between 2 to 3 different schools is do your homework on post-grad success. So there's great sophisticated tools out there where you can look up like the average salary for your particular major at a particular school. I would probably go to the school where the salary is higher, right? Because that indicates that chances are you're going to end up getting that first job out of college, which, newsflash, that is the job of going to college, is to get a job. And just really pay attention to that. Or if you know you want to go to grad school after college, like what percentage of students from that particular college end up going to law school, if that is in fact your ultimate goal. So just be a really smart consumer, ask the tough questions, and use that to your advantage as you're trying to make your match.
Absolutely. And then to echo a couple of things just on those 3 points, Admitted Students Day is a really great day to be on campus if you can be, because you're there with a lot of other people who are considering the same thing. That gut feeling, that vibe that Carrie was talking about could be a lot more attainable when you're in a sea of people who are possibly your peers, potentially. And then kind of skimming down to looking beyond the rankings, everything that Carrie just mentioned about postgraduate success is looking beyond the rankings. Now, obviously, you're looking at some rankings there, but reaching out to current students, reaching out to old alumni, and if you know them, that's amazing. If you don't, you'd be amazed at the number of people willing to talk about their college and their college experience to someone who reaches out. If you do it the right way, if you do it politely. So that would be definitely things to consider. You also, as Carrie said, maybe want to just think about your path and think about what check marks are important along the way. Is it going to be grad school? Is it going to be internship? What are the programs at those schools? And then kind of following up on that, I always caution my students, or just at least remind them, that a lot of times where you go to school is going to be the place where you're getting job offers or internship opportunities. And is that the place you want to be for 4 years? Or is that the place you're willing to be for 8 years, 10 years, potentially put roots down? So just thinking beyond those 4 years is extremely helpful. And when you do look beyond the rankings, there's plenty of things to consider, but at the end of the day, returning to your initial research, returning to what you wanted when this process started is really important, because A, it can tell you, okay, this is still how I feel, or it helps you identify changes in yourself throughout this process. I had a student that I worked with who was dead set on one school from day one, got deferred early, but then got admitted. And in the course of thinking they'd lost it and then getting it back, they realized that another school was actually what they truly wanted. It actually was a school that came and got them, gave them money, really showed their interest, and it made all the difference to feel like that was the place for them. So returning to that initial thinking can be a really good marker to say, I've maintained that, clarify you want to go in the same direction, or show you how you've changed in this process, because it is a long and sometimes stressful process that can reveal things about yourself that help make that decision easier. At the end of the day, making your match is meant to be the fun part, and it can feel stressful. But if you can kind of tap into that excitement and feel where the excitement is coming from, feel what is giving you that excitement, that can be a really good barometer for where you want to be.
Absolutely. And I think, just like you would with your college essays, when you were writing those, the advice we always gave was like, pick one or two trusted voices to review your essay and give you that kind of gut feedback. I think everybody has an opinion on where you should go, what you should do. And ultimately, like, think about those trusted voices in your life and turn to those people, because they're going to know where they see you being the most fulfilled. And I think just kind of leaning on that network that you've built for yourself will be really important, especially if it's a nail biter and you're coming down to two options, and it's really a tricky one to decide on. So one thing that we wanted to elaborate on, because this is a really kind of pivotal time in the cycle where wait lists come into full view. And so what a wait list means is that a college basically is saying, you know what, if an applicant receives a wait list offer, that means we really liked you, but unfortunately, we don't have space for you. So if you'd like to opt into the wait list, you can. And if we ultimately, after May 1st, realize that our yield is low and we have more space for you as an applicant, then we can accept you. And so wait lists are, I'll say this as delicately as I can. I think they're actually kind of mean to applicants, because it can provide a sense of false hope, especially for a student who might unfortunately just not end up getting off of that wait list. So ultimately, there's no harm in accepting your place on a wait list, but I want to be crystal clear here. You cannot bank on getting into your wait list school. Like, just point blank. You cannot bank on it. If at this point though, if you are offered a spot on a wait list for a school that you're like, yeah, if I got in without question, I would go. That's a good gut indicator that you should probably accept your place on the wait list. Yes, it's checking a box. It's letting the college know, keep me on that list. It's If it is your number one school, we would want you to go all in. So what we mean by that is writing a letter of continued interest, a thoughtful letter to your admission officer saying, thank you so much for giving me a spot on the wait list. Here's an update on what I've been up to since I hit submit on my application. If I were accepted off of your wait list, I would enroll without hesitation. And that needs to be genuine. So absolutely, those are kind of two steps as a waitlisted applicant you can take if you do want to accept that offer. But you cannot bake on it. You need to still accept an offer from a school that actually says, yes, we have a spot from you. One thing that I'll share so that you can kind of see the reality around waitlists is there's something called a common data set. Every college has to have one, and it provides the really relevant statistics related to a college and their admission cycle. And so if you do a Google search, University of Michigan common data set, you will find the common data set from the last application cycle. Now it can be a confusing document to go to, but if you can navigate to C2, you will find all the information related to that college and their particular wait list. So you can see here, University of Michigan does employ a wait list. They offered a place to qualified applicants to 24,000, almost 25,000 applicants were offered a spot on the wait list. Of those 25,000 applicants, almost 19,000 accepted their spot. And then how that trickles down is number of waitlisted students who were actually admitted, 973. So that is not a huge number out of 25,000 that were offered. Only 973 were ultimately offered that spot on campus. So just helpful to know to paint the very realistic picture when it comes to wait lists. I mean, I think any counselor you've talked to at ESM will have had a student or two who does get off of the wait list. We do see it happen, but we also need to educate you on the reality of the landscape.
And just to that point, 1 in 19 Michigan are roughly getting in means there is a chance. But the real clear message that we want you to take away is that it can be really anxiety invoking or producing if you are considering this as, a 50-50 shot. If you're like, I'm still on the fence. It's super important to deposit somewhere else. And it's really important to, accept your place if you want to, send your letter if you want to, but also work on making peace with the odds and the fact that in many cases, a wait list is a soft no. So we want to be thoughtful about how students are approaching this. We want them to be realistic. And then the other part is that this process is not a overnight, everyone's off the wait list or not. It can drag on May, June into July. That can be really difficult for students to handle. So having a really clear picture or defined picture of what is happening here is probably the most important part of the wait list. And data like this is helpful. There are a million anecdotes that Carrie and I have, and it's important to note some of those are positive. Some students do get in off the wait list. Some are really excited about it. And ultimately, that is an acceptance. You go to the college. It's not watered down or anything, but it is mostly about the mental health and the balance of a student having been in this process most likely for almost a year at this point, if not, multiple years if they're thinking that way. And then being told, well, just wait another few weeks, months, all the way into summer. So the wait list, you might have picked up that we can be a little cynical about it. It's totally fine. It's a part of the process, but it's a part of the process that has to be factored in the right way, which means depositing somewhere else, committing somewhere else and being at peace with that decision, and then being open to this coming through if it does, but being aware of the odds in the situation. Just to point out, again, Carrie mentioned it, but you can go to the common data set for any university to see their waitlist numbers. They will be from a previous cycle, but it'll give you a picture of what that waitlist looks like. Michigan just happened to be one that's really, really clear illustration of what we're trying to say.
Yeah. And to share a happy story, I did have an applicant last year who was waitlisted at Tulane, which was her top choice. And she had built a really great rapport with her admission officer, had been emailing for about a year, really engaged with that person. And she ended up getting an email from her admission officer. I want to say it was in like June, saying, "Hey, would you be available for a phone call?" And as soon as she forwarded that email to me, I thought, okay, this is a really good sign. So of course my students said yes, and they set up a time to talk, and she offered her a spot on the wait list, and ultimately it worked out, and she was able to attend. So there's happy stories out there for sure, but we just really wanted to paint a realistic picture. And as Stuart said, I think that the best point you just made is like being at peace with where you deposit, because ultimately, like, that mentally can be really hard if you're sort of in the gray with one area and not all in somewhere else. So find that peace as best as you can.
And we did just get one question about out-of-state students, I believe, waitlisted in Michigan versus not. And one thing to note is that's a little bit dependent on the yield and how that shakes out. It's a little bit of a trickle-down effect. But Carrie, do you have any data or perspective on that?
That would be a great question to ask the admissions office directly. And you can say, hey, I accessed this data through common data set, wondering how this affects in-state versus out-of-state. I want to correctly align my expectations. And they might not be able to provide that data for you. Sometimes admission offices can be pretty guarded with that kind of intel. But it's definitely worth asking. I don't think they drill down quite that deep on the common data set. Great. My hunch is in that case, more of those spots are given to in-state, but you never know with any given application year, or in a school's priorities. And perhaps their priority is rounding out the class more with students who come from states that aren't represented really well, or gaining more tuition dollars from out-of-state applicants. Like who knows?
And
So,
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
just one more note there. There's also a note on it's possible their yield is much lower for a certain major than it is for another major. Certain programs could reach capacity quicker, things like that. So there's a lot of factors that you may not know. Carrie's point about calling admissions, it definitely can't hurt.
Totally. And then that's the part of that's tricky about our job, is that we just don't always know an institution's priorities. It can become obvious after you see an admission decision come out, but they of course don't share that with us. So yeah, that's where having a little bit of that hope can be useful, because you just don't know, and it's of course worth shooting your shot. But for those applicants who might not be in the waitlist position, or who are, either way, you have to make that official decision by May 1st. So you can see the confetti. It's a really exciting day. It's a national day where any student who is planning to attend a college in the United States needs to have let that college know by May 1st. So that is kind of the very, very end of the road, and you have to get that decision in by May 1st. We've outlined some specific to-dos for seniors between now and May 1st that we'll go over. So first off, yeah, you've got to put down your deposit. So it's one thing to say, yes, I'm coming to your school, but that means nothing if you haven't paid your deposit. Deposit is typically anywhere from like $200-300 to like $800 or $900, but you've got to put your deposit down. Once that deposit is down, then you're officially in the college's system as a student who plans to matriculate and attend for fall 2025, which is super exciting. And then begins the process of getting very school-specific communications. A lot of times, pretty quickly after you deposit, you'll be set up with a school-specific email that you'll have to actually set up. We say it to our students from day one, but Now is a very important time to read the fine print on absolutely everything. Really read your emails closely, follow all directions, because it could mean you're missing out on important things like housing or enrolling in your first set of classes in college. So put that deposit down and then follow all steps. And then the last thing that I'll mention for this slide is that now is a really, really important time to thank all those special people in your life who helped you get to where you're at. Being able to deposit, say yes, definitively, wear the sweatshirt for the school that you're going to is a huge milestone, one that the senior really deserves all the credit for getting to that point. But we'd be remiss if we didn't say that there's typically a lot of people that also help the senior get to that point. So take a minute to write a thoughtful thank you note. Yes, write a thank you note, not email, old school. Write a thank you note to your teachers, your counselors, your parents, and really thank all those people that got you to where you're at. Because we're just as excited as you are to be able to congratulate you and to see you spread your wings and ultimately go to college.
Just another note there, this is a down the line note, but also keep people updated about your experience there and the things you're working on, especially if there was, a teacher who gave you the passion to work in a field, or obviously keep your parents up to date, but any other sort of mentor, counselor, person who had a big effect on you. Big thank you now, and then keeping in contact is always a great idea, not just to be kind, but to maintain that relationship for as you progress into professional life and things like that. Just to note some of the things that might be on that school-specific checklist, you can read the list here, but some really important ones are going to be the housing. For a lot of schools, that is a process that you need to engage with and you want to make work for you. So learn about how they set up their housing, dive in as quickly as possible, start to figure it out. The health office requirements are really important because they are forms and checklists that the school needs. And then academic enrollment. This can be crucial because you can be picking your classes or setting up your tests to determine your levels and things like that. So you want to be on top of that. A lot of this communication will end up coming through a school email that you'll activate and you'll set up. So your application portal is where you should start out, and that'll set you down a path, but it'll ultimately end in a different place. So just be on top of passwords, things like that, setting everything up and checking regularly. As you're doing all this, it's senior year, you're having the time of your life, everybody's about to go their separate ways. Don't forget to finish strong. Sending your final transcripts and sending a transcript that looks just as strong as the rest of your career. Obviously, we have experienced, both Carrie and I, the downside of big dips and the effect that can have on admissions. So the advice I always give students is if you are maintaining your grades, you have nothing to worry about. Beyond that, making sure the school gets that final transcript and setting AP scores are two important steps that you can definitely make sure are done with the help of a counselor. But at the end of the day, if you finish strong, you'll have all summer to be heading into college, and that can be the time you really relax. So try as best you can to stay on that course, stay on the course you've been on, finish strong, and keep the excitement going for what will be a really big transition that you get to kind of celebrate along the way.
Absolutely. Great. So we'll open up the webinar to questions. I see one here. The question is, will you be discussing the appeal process at all to understand if this is a good option to give the student another chance? Any tips for going down this path, please? Excellent question. So an appeal is when an applicant receives a no. So the college says, unfortunately, we're not able to offer you a spot. There's no wait list offered. It's just a no. Sometimes an applicant is not satisfied with that decision and they want to appeal. And so when I have students in this situation, it is entirely school dependent. So some schools do not entertain appeals at all. It's just their policy. And they say, we've taken the time to review your application. I'm sorry, we won't accept this. Best of luck. Others have an actual process around the appeal. Two examples I'll give is a student of mine is in the process of appealing University of Texas at Austin. And they have a process around it. This was actually last year, so I'm not positive on this year's cycle. But they had a process around it. We wrote the letter, we answered a couple of specific questions, and they had a specific date you had to submit it by. And that was very well outlined. University of Miami, I have a current applicant who is wanted to appeal. So we reached out to her admission officer, and the officer was very polite and said, unfortunately, we will not accept your appeal. And so figuring out if it's even something that's going to be entertained is step one with appeals. Step two is treating it much like you would a wait list or a deferral letter. And you're sending a letter to make your case and say, I respectfully appreciate, the decision you've made, but I would like to appeal it, and this is why. And it's making a case for yourself as to why a university is would be potentially interested in accepting an appeal. If you are going to appeal, and a college does say yes, they would entertain it, having a really thoughtful letter is going to be really important. Potentially gathering another letter of recommendation from a teacher to strengthen your portfolio, and really make a case. But just like wait lists, you would not find out that an appeal is accepted until June, July. It's definitely not a guarantee. And I would say I feel just as pessimistic about an appeal as I would a wait list. These admission officers are very thoughtful with their decisions, and it's pretty rare to get something overturned. Do you have any other?
Yeah, just a couple notes there. I think I'd echo Carrie and maybe take it one notch higher, that it's a little bit like a wait list on steroids. It's a little bit, you're prolonging the process, which is totally valid if you're comfortable with that decision, but you definitely are moving on with something else in the midst of that, because it is a process that can be long, difficult, and a little bit of a long shot. With that being said, there are successful ones, and what Carrie said about the extra recommendation is a huge part in my mind. Something you want to do with an appeal is balance the emotional appeal and the factual appeal, and you want to make sure that you're communicating the merits of the appeal, and that extra recommender really can add some oomph, especially if it's a recommender who's seen you over the time since you applied and can speak to the work you've been doing as that decision was being made, that might have given the college more context. Um, it's a difficult process. It's also important to note just like the size of the school, the size of the wait list, the size of the class can all give you little clues as to what the chances are of jumping over all that. But at the end of the day, if you want to, go for it, but do it with eyes open that it's a long process. And like Carrie said, finding out is the first step. Finding out if it's a possibility is a really good first step, and then making the best decision from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jennifer, I do see your hand raised, but we're not able to get participants on microphone. So if you could chat your question, that would be great. Okay, this question came from Hallie. The question is, can you describe any trends regarding colleges going to the wait list before May 2nd? One more, any trends regarding early action and early decision deferrals converting to waitlist versus rejection? I would say I don't think I've ever seen a college go to a waitlist before May 1st. Have you, Stuart?
No, I mean there's urban legends that I've heard, but I think if you're looking for a trend there, the trend is that it will come
After.
after National Decision Day.
Yeah, for sure. Because they really need to, a college has to, the worst situation they could get in is over enrolling.
Yeah.
And then that causes problems for students not having enough beds in a dorm room, et cetera. And so they're not going to draw from that wait list until they have the full snapshot of how many spots are actually taken. So I don't think that would happen. And then trends regarding early action and early decision deferrals converting to waitlist versus rejection. I don't have any specific data or insights on that. I would say it's usually pretty obvious to me when a deferral is what we call a soft no. And we do our best to educate students on that and let them know, like, look, if a college is, if we believe that the deferral is a soft no, the likelihood of them getting a wait list is pretty slim. Then they would just get rejected. But unfortunately, it's like USC is a great example. They don't really they accept a handful of students, literally a handful, in the early action round, and then they defer just about everybody else. And so I have had students who are on the weaker side academically, and I know that that deferral is not truly like something that I'm going to bank on them getting an acceptance for. Unfortunately, it will ultimately in March when the regular round comes out result in a rejection. Yeah, I think that's probably as much insight as I can give to that question. Do you have anything
One
else?
note, yeah, one of there, and it'll be anecdotal, but I do think there's a difference between an ED deferral to waitlist as opposed to EA deferral and potential waitlist, especially given the size of the school. I had a student last year, ED to Brown, deferred, put on the waitlist, and ended up getting in. And it's not a common path, but there is something to be said about the strength of an ED application versus an EA, which is something students can have 10 different EAs. So I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a trend or data, but that is one anecdote that can kind of speak a little bit to the difference in those situations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's the college's way of saying back to you, like, look, we see you, we know you put us as your number one. And that at the end of the day, when it comes down to two applicants on a wait list, like they're probably gonna go with the one who stuck their neck out early on and chose them. And I think all those little micro moves that you make throughout this process can certainly have a ripple effect. One more question here. Is there truth to the statement that there's more room to negotiate costs with private versus public schools? Absolutely. So public schools, and I'm not a financial aid expert, I always like to preface that, but I will say that public schools do not have as large of endowments as a private school does. And a private school is able to often use more funds to try and attract applicants to come. And so that's why when you look at what we call sticker price or like the cost of attendance for a college, a lot of times if you compare a public and a private school, it actually ends up being about the same. And so I'm always counseling students early on in this process, like if cost is a consideration, don't discount private schools, just focus on private schools that give out generous merit aid, because ultimately those private schools have more money to dish out than a public school would. So yes, the short answer is yes, more room to negotiate with a private school.
Absolutely. And just to echo Carrie, some of these schools have high sticker prices, and then they alleviate a lot of the cost very quickly through scholarships. And then that opportunity to kind of bargain or negotiate becomes really important. So, looping back to our previous slide, it's always worth a call. It's always worth an inquiry, but definitely typically more successful at a private school.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and looks like we have one last question here. What if a student did not apply for financial aid but now needs it? So technically the FAFSA, which is the federal application for student aid, was due March 2nd for California applicants at least. So you're overdue, but I would say I think it's probably still possible to apply and at least work with each of your schools on a school by school basis. The very first thing I would do is that school where you're planning to submit your deposit and enroll, call that financial aid office today before you put in the deposit, just so you have the full picture of expectations and say, look, I missed the boat. Now I want to apply for the FAFSA, potentially the CSS profile if that applies. What are my options? And they may say, unfortunately, your package is your package and we're not able to change that, but know that the financial aid process is one that you have to apply for every single year. So if you missed the boat for this application cycle, You will have to do the same thing next year once you're a freshman in college, and you can get your financial aid sorted at that point.
Yeah, and I would just totally agree and add on. This is kind of the time if you have multiple acceptances, you make your list of interested to, least interested. You start at the top and you call, and you just make sure you have information for each school, because if that, in your question you said now needs it, and if it's a true need, if it's a really important part of the decision-making process, you want the information from all the possibilities, all the schools you're considering, and that'll help you make that decision. But definitely calling the schools is the next step. And as Carrie alluded to, today is the best day to do that.
Absolutely. Great. Well, that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for attending. There should be a recording of this webinar sent out, or at least accessible. So stay tuned for that. And looking forward to hopping on another webinar soon.
Great to see everyone.
Take care.